Francisco was, of course, miles away from home when I signed in, still wearing the pajamas he was wearing when I signed out. The habit didn't bother me as much as inconvenience. We had work to do, and there was no way I was comfortable wearing leisure clothes to the Peace Concepts office in front of its only other employee. The work in question was to sell crates of goods Francisco had personally purchased. I'd been inspired by an external voice to call the police when I was antagonized by violent thieves, a process which had completely escaped my methodology. I'd been originally defeated at the thought of being stuck with the crates of alcohol and with no way to sell them, but this newfound opportunity to coalesce with the strength of social order was inspiring beyond measure. Somewhat disconcerting, the fact that working with the police instead of being attacked by them never crossed my mind. I made the long trek from Francisco's apartment to the Peace Concepts warehouse, where I intended to sell the 2 remaining crates in inventory, stopping at the stoplights in a manner that suggested I was adhering to the rules in hopes that they would benefit me in the long run. And the run was a long run, especially waiting 30 seconds at a traffic light. I would find Envy at an intersection with a man and his convertible top as it started to rain, whether that's been happening more than enough in the game, if you ask me. But fortunately, Francisco safely made it to the warehouse, armed with his cell phone and prepared for a new showdown that wouldn't be slowed by precipitation. In the warehouse, I was greeted by 3 surprises. The first was the crate from the plane had been reimbursed somehow, and Peace Concepts was prepared to make a full profit of all the purchased goods. The second surprise was that I was once again made CEO of Peace Concepts, which was a good feeling, and the third surprise was that I wasn't given a plane, but instead a nightmarish dystopian tour bus to operate and deliver the 3 crates of alcohol to their destination, the warehouse of American partners. Upon entering the vehicle from the passenger side for some reason, I was once again told my business activities were broadcast to the world, adding an intense level of danger to the mission beyond the fact that I'm pretty sure Francisco did not have a special operator license for this vehicle. Additionally, I wasn't given a destination, just vague directions to use Trackify to search for the drop-off location. I've decided that Trackify is clearly an app still in development, as it does not pinpoint a destination, it simply gives the idea of which direction to move next, independent of roads or maps of any sort. Unsurprisingly, following these vague directions was not simple, and the rain didn't make anything easier. As I tried to navigate the backfield of an overpass, slipping between broken walls and alleyways, I would like to point out the number of bullets Francisco was carrying. It was a lot. Now, I've never purchased a weapon or ammunition of any kind, but at some point I noticed Francisco was carrying a bunch of weapons not even available to anyone of his level, which I'm assuming had appeared in his inventory when another player used game-altering systems. As a result, Francisco was very armed, but as attempts to discard weapons proved ineffective in the past, the idea of leaving 10,000 bullets in a gun somewhere seemed worse for society than simply holding on to and never using them. With 26 minutes remaining to find my mystery destination, I was visited by another player, Tap3__, driving a car with a lot of external armor. Assuming the driver was simply somewhat defensive and acknowledging my vehicle had a slightly more excessively large profile, I tried to dodge around Tap3__, following Trackify, although this player seemed bent on inconveniencing me even more than pajamas. I took a relatively liberal right on red, at which point a ghost car began to occupy the same space as Francisco's behemoth. ZOMG_H4X was in what I'm assuming was passive mode, which meant he was completely invulnerable and we could occupy the same space but could not interact. I stopped at another stoplight where I was rammed by Tap3__, and then riddled by him. The real riddling begging the question of whether or not I should continue this foray if I was attracting violence and putting Francisco's financial future at risk. At this point I would say I had submitted myself entirely to the intention of goodwill and peace. I had of course taken missteps and was naturally imperfect, but my intention had been pure the entire time. Having been destroyed, Francisco and I's efforts were now subject to fate alone, and the karmic balance that had been built up to this point. I immediately ran back to the vehicle, knowing only effort would decide if this mission was successful, at which point I saw a man running in the street with a weapon. I watched helplessly as he approached the van, acknowledging that anyone could steal it, and Francisco did not have any non-violent means by which he could get it back. I watched as he was thrown into the van by an explosive, and as ZOMG_H4X drove away from the scene, the same player who had defeated Tap3__ the moment he attacked me. And as I reopened Trackify, I had to concede that my contributions to this world were only as valuable as fate would allow them to be. Having already been murdered, I made an outrageous double right turn and encountered an NPC going the wrong way, distracting me enough to reveal my destination, a yellow circle by 2 shuttered garage doors. Francisco dropped off his machine, pulling in $54,000, which after the various amounts of money he lost by being murdered over and over put Francisco at a healthy $35,000 profit, and completing the mission boosted him up to level 27. The man who tried to steal Francisco's van came back for revenge, but my goal was complete and the dynamics of this world had opened up. I could peacefully engage in business. Although deadly and dangerous, it was still possible to peacefully complete the mission as long as external forces of violence balanced themselves out. I was still subject to the laws of karma and fate, but I believed that as long as I followed my intention to grow in a peaceful way, I could not be stopped, and would be permitted to keep playing, as I so desired. Francisco would be killed several times on his way home, depositing $7,500 in the bank to avoid losing it to muggings or death, but losing almost all of the remaining $700 and not having enough cash to pay the taxi driver upon arriving back at work.
This is my job, you cheap asshole.
The taxi driver didn't give me the opportunity to withdraw any money, and immediately called the police on Francisco. The irony of having set out to call the police was certainly not lost on me. Back at the office, I of course had some thinking to do. I'd begun to see violence as a realm of its own, and peacefulness a realm I constantly failed to remain in. Even though my initial intention was to actively create a peaceful environment, an additional intention to engage in the naturally violent realm of business and currency exchange was rewarded with naturally inescapable violent consequence. And I was beginning to wonder if a yacht bought with the money that was covered in the blood of ardent thieves or desperate pirates would carry with it a similar karmic curse. However, because my peaceful intentions supported with passively violent action would produce violent circumstances, then in theory peaceful intention with purely peaceful action should instead produce peaceful consequences. I had proven my willingness to fearlessly engage in the systems in place, but they were beginning to seem like temptation, and that a dangerous path to walk. But the road to peaceful action was calling Francisco's name, and I was prepared to take the next step.